In 1876, a pregnant woman was left chained to a wagon wheel in the Arizona desert, abandoned by the men who swore to protect her. She had 3 days of water, a dying son above her, and a baby kicking inside her belly. What happened next would bind two families across a divide the world said could never be crossed. Before we dive into the story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another incredible story. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now let's continue with the story. The chain bit into Sarah Kennett's ankle, the iron warm from hours under the brutal Sonoran sun. She'd stopped pulling against it sometime yesterday, or maybe it was this morning. Time had blurred into a single, endless moment of heat, thirst, and the relentless kicking of the child inside her. 7 months pregnant, and left to die like a lamed horse. The wagon wheel she was chained to lay on its side, half buried in red sand. The rest of the wagon was gone, stripped by her husband's business partners after Matthew died of fever 3 days back. They'd taken the goods, the horses, the water barrels, everything worth stealing. They'd left her with a single canteen, nearly empty now, and words that still rang in her ears. "Sorry, Mrs. Kennett. Can't risk the cargo on a pregnant woman. You understand." She understood perfectly. Matthew had been the one they needed. His contacts, his maps, his knowledge of the territory. Without him, she was dead weight. Worse than dead weight. She was a liability, a mouth to feed, a woman who might slow them down or attract attention. The baby kicked again, hard enough to make her gasp. Her dress clung to her skin, soaked through with sweat. Vultures had been circling since dawn, their shadows crossing her face in patient intervals. She'd tried everything. Digging under the wheel, smashing rocks against the chain, screaming until her voice gave out. The desert swallowed sound like it swallowed everything else. Matthew's face floated through her mind. His last words, whispered through fever. "If something happens to me, Sarah, you won't be alone. I made sure of it." She'd thought he was delirious. Now, dying in the place where he'd died, she wondered what he'd meant. The sun was dropping toward the western mountains when she heard it. Footsteps, not the scuffle of a lizard or the hop of a jackrabbit. Human footsteps, deliberate and careful. Sarah's heart hammered. She tried to sit up straighter, tried to look less like a corpse. Her hand closed around a sharp rock. If it was one of Matthew's partners coming back to finish what the desert started, she'd take at least one of them with her. The footsteps stopped just beyond her line of sight, somewhere behind the broken wheel. A shadow fell across her face, and Sarah's grip tightened on the rock. But when the figure moved into view, she froze. The man was Navajo, tall and lean, with long black hair tied back, with a strip of leather. He wore a mixture of traditional clothing and pieces clearly taken from white settlements. A rifle hung across his back. His eyes, dark and steady, moved from her face to the chain at her ankle, then to her swollen belly. Sarah's mind raced. Stories of Indian raids filled every newspaper back east. Tales of captives and scalpings and worse. But this man didn't reach for a weapon. He simply knelt beside her, his movements careful, almost gentle. He examined the chain without touching her, his calloused fingers tracing the iron links to where they locked around the wagon wheel. Then his eyes met hers, and something flickered in them. Recognition. "You," Sarah whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "You're him." 6 months ago, a cold night outside Santa Fe. Matthew shaking her awake in their tent, his finger pressed to his lips. Outside, cavalry soldiers on horseback, their torches cutting through the darkness, their voices sharp with authority. Anyone seen a Navajo man pass through? Tall, scar on his left hand. He's wanted for killing a settler." Matthew had stepped out, his face calm, his voice easy. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description, Lieutenant. We've been camped here 2 days. Just us and the crickets." The soldiers had searched anyway, rough hands pulling through their supplies, overturning crates. They'd missed the narrow space beneath the false floor of their supply wagon, where a man could barely breathe, let alone move. After the soldiers left, Matthew had given the man inside food, water, a spare horse. Sarah had watched from the tent as they spoke in low voices, Matthew's broken Spanish mixing with the man's broken English. "If you ever need help," the Navajo man had said, his hand gripping Matthew's forearm. "If your woman ever needs help, I will come." Matthew had nodded. "I'll hold you to that promise." Now that same man knelt before her in the desert, her husband 3 days dead, and Sarah understood. "Matthew," she gasped, "he asked you to watch over me." The warrior nodded once. When he spoke, his English was hesitant but clear. "Your husband saved my life. The soldiers, they wanted to hang me for something I did not do. He hid me, gave me supplies, told them lies to protect me." Tears burned Sarah's eyes. He knew he might not make it. "He asked me to find you if he did not reach California. He described this route. I have been tracking your wagon for 2 days. The man's jaw tightened. "I found where they left you." He pulled a knife from his belt, and Sarah flinched despite herself. But he moved to the chain, wedging the blade beneath a link, testing its strength. "I made a promise to a good man," he said quietly, "and I keep my promises." The baby kicked hard, as if in agreement, and Sarah felt something break loose inside her chest. Not fear, hope. Tsela worked the knife blade against the chain link, leverage and patience his only tools. The metal groaned, but held. He switched. Tactics. Searching the ground for rocks with sharp edges, testing each one against the iron. Sarah watched his hands move with practiced efficiency. The scar the soldiers had mentioned ran across his left palm, white against brown skin. Every few minutes, he'd pause to give her water from a leather pouch, tilting it carefully to her cracked lips. "My name is Tsela," he said between strikes. "It means stars in my language." "Sarah." She tried to smile, but another sensation cut through her, different from the cramping thirst and exhaustion. A tightening deep in her belly that made her breath catch. Not now. Please, not now. But her body had its own timeline. The days of dehydration, the stress, the scorching heat had taken their toll. Another contraction hit, harder this time, and she couldn't hide the gasp. Tsela's head snapped up. His eyes went to her face, then down to where her hands clutched her stomach. Understanding crossed his features, followed by something that might have been fear. "The baby," Sarah managed. "It's coming." He dropped the rock immediately. His hands hovered over the chain, over her, his usual calm cracking. "Too soon. Your body is not ready. Tell that to the baby." Another wave of pain rolled through her, and she felt wetness spread beneath her dress. Her water had broken. Tsela made a decision. He stopped trying to break the chain and instead attacked the wooden wheel itself, using his knife to dig at the ancient wood around the metal hub. The wheel had been sitting in the desert for days, dried and weakened by the sun. Sarah's contractions came faster now, each one stealing her breath. She bit down on her own arm to keep from screaming. Tsela worked faster, sweat dripping from his face, his knife gouging chunks from the wheel. "Almost," he muttered. "Almost." The wheel splintered, not broken free, but damaged enough that he could work the hub loose. He grabbed the entire wheel, chain still attached to Sarah's ankle, and lifted. "Can you stand?" Sarah tried. Her legs shook, barely holding her weight. Another contraction hit, and she doubled over, crying out despite herself. Tsela didn't hesitate. He swept her into his arms, the chain and wheel dangling from her ankle, banging against his leg as he moved. From somewhere, he produced a leather blanket and canvas, quickly fashioning a travois using branches he must have gathered earlier. He laid her on it as gently as possible, securing the wheel beside her so it wouldn't drag. "There is shelter," he said, already pulling the travois forward. "My sister. She knows birth. We must hurry." Sarah's vision blurred with pain and tears as the desert began to move around her. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. The canyon appeared like a mirage, a crack in the red rock walls that Tsela navigated with sure feet. Sarah's contractions were coming every few minutes now, each one tearing through her like a knife. She gripped the edges of the travois, her knuckles white, biting back screams that wanted to escape. Ancient cliff dwellings rose on either side, structures carved into the stone itself. A small spring trickled from the rocks, creating a pool of clear water, and beside that pool sat a woman with a baby on her hip and a young girl playing nearby. The woman's head jerked up at their approach. She said something sharp in Navajo, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Tsela responded rapidly, gesturing to Sarah, to the chain, to her belly. The woman handed her baby to the girl and rushed forward. She was younger than Sarah expected, perhaps 20, with intelligent eyes and sure hands. She spoke to Tsela, her tone commanding, and he immediately began unhitching the travois. "My sister Dolly," Tsela said quickly. "She will help you. She has delivered many babies." Dolly knelt beside Sarah, her hands moving over her belly with practiced confidence. She spoke in Navajo, her voice calm despite the urgency in her movements. Sarah didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. Vizyantbwait was coming now. They carried her to one of the cliff dwellings, a small room with packed earth floors and ancient smoke stains on the ceiling. Dolly spread blankets and began barking orders at Tsela, who pulled tools from a leather bag, a knife, strips of clean cloth, a bowl for water. Another contraction ripped through Sarah, and this time she did scream. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, primitive and raw. Dolly's hands pressed against her belly, feeling the baby's position, and her face tightened. She spoke to Tsela, urgent and quick. He grabbed the chain still locked around Sarah's ankle and attacked it with a small axe Dolly thrust at him. The blows rang like bells in the confined space. Sarah barely heard them through the pain. The baby was coming too fast, too soon. She could feel it, the pressure building, her body trying to push out a child that wasn't ready to be born. 7 months. Babies born at 7 months didn't always survive. She knew that. Everyone knew that. Tsela's axe finally broke through the chain. He pulled the iron from her ankle, leaving raw, bleeding skin beneath. But Sarah barely felt it. Another contraction seized her, the strongest yet, and Dolly positioned herself between Sarah's legs. The Navajo woman looked up, met Sarah's eyes, and nodded once. Then she said something in her language that sounded like a prayer. Sarah pushed, and the world narrowed to pain and pressure, and the desperate hope that her baby would breathe. The baby came in a rush of blood and fluid, tiny and purple, and terrifyingly silent. Dolly caught her in sure hands, moving with speed that seemed impossible. She cleared the infant's mouth, rubbed her chest, spoke urgently in Navajo, as if willing the child to respond. Nothing. The baby's chest didn't move. Sarah tried to sit up, panic flooding through her exhaustion. Please, please, no. Dolly tilted the baby upside down, struck her back once, twice. The third strike, a weak, mewling cry broke the silence. Thin and reedy, barely louder than a kitten. But it was life. Sarah sobbed, reaching for her daughter. Dolly wrapped the baby in soft deerskin and placed her on Sarah's chest. The infant was impossibly small, her skin translucent, her fingers like tiny twigs. Her eyes stayed closed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Dolly spoke to Selah, her tone grave. He translated quietly. She says the baby is very early, very small. She needs milk soon, but... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Sarah's milk hadn't come in yet. It wouldn't for days. By then, this fragile scrap of life might be gone. Sarah tried anyway, guiding the baby to her breast, but the infant's sucking was weak and uncoordinated. After a few minutes, she stopped trying altogether, her tiny head lolling to the side. "No," Sarah whispered. "No, you have to try, please." Dolly watched for a moment, then made a decision. She stood and walked to where her own baby boy sat with the older girl. He was plump and healthy, perhaps 8 months old. Dolly picked him up, spoke softly to him, then returned. She settled beside Sarah and opened her own dress. Without ceremony, without hesitation, she lifted Sarah's baby and brought her to her own breast. Sarah stared, not understanding at first. Then the baby's mouth found Dolly's nipple and began to suckle, weak but persistent. Milk, the lifeline Sarah couldn't provide. "Wait," Sarah started, but Selah put a hand on her shoulder. "In our tradition, when a woman nurses another woman's child, they become family," he said quietly. "The children are milk siblings. Their bond is sacred. They are as close as blood." Dolly looked up at Sarah, and despite the language barrier, the message in her eyes was clear. "Your daughter will not die. Not while I have breath and milk to give." Sarah's throat closed with emotion. These people owed her nothing. They were hiding from soldiers who wanted to force them onto reservations. They had their own children to protect. Yet here was Dolly, offering her breast, her milk, her protection to a white woman's baby. Dolly's son fussed, wanting his turn. She smiled and shifted positions, nursing both infants together, one at each breast. The children's tiny hands touched, fingers curling around each other. "What is your son's name?" Sarah asked through tears. Selah spoke to his sister. She replied, her voice gentle. "River," Selah translated. "His name is River." Sarah looked down at her own daughter, still feeding weakly, but feeding nonetheless. "Promise," she whispered. "Her name is Promise." 5 days passed in a haze of recovery and tentative hope. Promise grew stronger with each feeding, her cries louder, her grip firmer. Sarah's body slowly healed, though the raw wound around her ankle still wept. Dolly tended both mother and child with quiet competence, never once making Sarah feel like a burden. On the morning of the 6th day, Selah returned from hunting with his face tight and his movements quick. He spoke rapidly to Dolly, who immediately gathered her children and disappeared into one of the deeper cliff dwellings. "Soldiers," Selah said, already helping Sarah to her feet. "Coming up the canyon. You must talk to them. Alone." Sarah's heart hammered. They'll take you. They'll take Dolly and the children. Then you must make sure they do not look. His eyes held hers. Your husband saved me once with lies. Now you must do the same. He pressed promise into her arms and vanished into the rocks like smoke. Sarah barely had time to smooth her dress before 3 cavalry soldiers rode into view, led by a lieutenant with cold blue eyes and a mouth like a knife slash. He dismounted, his gaze sweeping the camp, the spring, the cliff dwellings behind her. Mrs. Kennett, he said, and Sarah's blood ran cold. He knew her name. Lieutenant Vogel, we've been searching for you since your husband's associates reported you missing. Missing? Sarah's voice came out stronger than she felt. They chained me to a wagon wheel and left me to die. Vogel's expression didn't change. That's not how they tell it. They say you wandered off delirious with grief, and they couldn't find you. He gestured to the camp. Yet here you are, alive, well-fed, with supplies that look distinctly Indian. Sarah shifted promise in her arms, buying time. Mexican traders found me. They brought me here, said it was safe. They left yesterday. Mexican traders. Vogel's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. How convenient. He nodded to his men, who began moving toward the cliff dwellings. Wait, Sarah stepped forward. My baby was born premature. She's still too weak to travel. I need a few more days. Vogel studied promise, his face unreadable. Your husband was wanted for harboring fugitives, Mrs. Kennett. Did you know that? He helped a Navajo murderer escape justice in Santa Fe. Some say his widow might know where that Indian went. The trap was laid bare. Sarah met his eyes without flinching. My husband helped a lot of people. He never asked their crimes or their color, and I never asked his business. Vogel stepped closer, his voice dropping. I'm stationing 2 men at the canyon mouth. You have 3 days to make that baby ready to travel. Then you're coming with us, and we're going to have a long conversation about who really brought you here. He remounted, but his eyes swept the canyon once more before he left. 3 days, Mrs. Kennett, and if I find out you're lying, things will go very badly for everyone involved. Selah emerged from the rocks only after the soldiers were long gone, their dust settling in the distance. His face was grim as he listened to Sarah repeat Vogel's words. 3 days, he said quietly. Then he returns with more men. They will search every dwelling. They will find us. Dolly spoke urgently in Navajo, her baby on her hip, fear naked in her eyes. Her daughter clung to her skirt, too young to understand, but old enough to sense danger. Sarah looked down at Promise, asleep in her arms, her breathing still fragile, but steady. There has to be a way, somewhere you can hide until they leave. They will not leave. Selah's voice was flat with certainty. Your husband's land claim is valuable. If they can prove you helped fugitives, they can take it. Make it government property. Vogel gets a promotion, maybe even the land itself. He met her eyes. They want a reason to arrest you. We are that reason. The truth of it settled like a stone in Sarah's stomach. She'd been a fool to think this would end any other way. Then I'll go with them. Tell them whatever they want to hear. Just keep Promise safe until I can come back for her. No. Dolly's voice cut through the discussion, sharp and clear. She spoke rapidly to Selah, her hands moving in emphatic gestures. Selah listened, his expression shifting from doubt to consideration. Finally, he nodded. There is another way, he said. 5 days north, through the mountains, there is a town called Prescott. A judge there, Judge Farrow. He is not like other white men. He ruled once that Navajo people could not be forced onto reservation land if they had legal employment with white settlers. Sarah frowned. But I don't have legal claim to anything yet. Matthew's papers are with his partners. Matthew gave me copies. Selah pulled a wrapped leather bundle from his pack. Inside were land deeds, marriage certificates, documents stamped and signed. He told me to keep them safe. Said if anything happened, you would need proof. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded the papers. Matthew had planned for everything, even his own death. If you reach Judge Farrow, Selah continued, you can claim your land legally, and if we are with you as your employees, working your claim, they cannot touch us. 5 days through the mountains with a newborn, Sarah said slowly, with soldiers watching the canyon mouth. With Apache territory between here and there, Selah added grimly, and your body still healing from birth. Dolly spoke again, her tone brooking no argument. Selah translated. She says milk siblings cannot be separated this young. She comes with us. Both children come. Sarah looked around at the faces watching her. A Navajo warrior wanted for a crime he didn't commit. His sister with 2 small children, hiding from forced relocation. And her own daughter, so tiny she might not survive a gentle cradle, much less a mountain crossing. When do we leave? Sarah asked. Selah's jaw tightened with respect. Before dawn, while the guards are cold and tired and watching the wrong direction. They left in darkness so complete Sarah could barely see her own hands. Selah led them up a crack in the canyon wall that Sarah would have sworn was solid rock, a path only visible to someone who knew exactly where to look. Behind them, the 2 guards sat by their fire, oblivious. The climb was agony. Sarah's legs shook with every step, her body still torn from birth. Dolly carried River on her back in a cradle board, while somehow also steadying her daughter. Sarah clutched Promise against her chest, terrified every stumble would send them both tumbling into darkness. By dawn, they'd cleared the canyon and entered terrain that turned Sarah's blood cold. Narrow paths along cliff edges, where one misstep meant a 100-foot drop. Loose scree that shifted underfoot. And always climbing higher. On the second day, Sarah started bleeding again. Not heavily, but enough to leave spots on the rocks behind her. Dolly noticed immediately, her face creasing with worry. She made Sarah rest while she prepared a compress of herbs and moss, binding it in place with strips of cloth. Promise cried often now, hungry and uncomfortable in the cold mountain air. Each wail echoed off the rocks, announcing their presence to anyone within a mile. Dolly nursed her whenever possible, but the constant travel was affecting her milk supply. Both babies were fussy and thin. The third day brought them face to face with 5 Apache warriors on horseback, blocking the narrow trail ahead. Sarah's heart stopped. She'd heard the stories. Apache and Navajo were old enemies, their hatred running generations deep. Selah raised his hand in peace, speaking in a language Sarah didn't recognize. One of the Apache men responded, his tone sharp with suspicion. They circled on their horses, taking in the strange group with calculating eyes. The lead warrior dismounted and walked straight to Sarah. He looked at Promise, then at her blood-stained dress, then back to her face. He spoke to Selah without taking his eyes off her. He asks why a white woman travels with Navajo. Selah translated carefully. Why you risk your life and your baby's life on this trail. Sarah met the Apache warrior's gaze. Because the alternative is worse. Because these people saved us when my own kind left us to die. Selah translated. The warrior's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He spoke again, Longer this time. He says his own wife gave birth on a hard trail 2 winters ago, Selah said quietly. The baby died. He says he knows the look of a woman bleeding too much after birth. The warrior turned and spoke to his men. They dismounted and began unpacking supplies. Dried meat, a water skin, a thick blanket that smelled of smoke and sage. The lead warrior pressed the blanket into Sarah's hands and spoke directly to her in broken English. Your baby lives. That is good medicine. Go fast to Prescott. Cavalry comes behind you. Then they mounted and rode past, leaving Sarah standing there with tears streaming down her face. Prescott rose from the valley like a fever dream, wooden buildings and dirt streets that felt impossibly civilized after 5 days in the wilderness. Sarah's legs nearly gave out at the sight of it. They entered at midday, and the town stopped to stare. A bleeding white woman carrying a tiny baby, flanked by a Navajo warrior and his sister with 2 more children. Conversations died. Shop doors closed. A woman pulled her daughter inside and locked the latch. Judge Farrow's office, Sarah said through cracked lips. Where? A shopkeeper pointed wordlessly down the main street. The judge's office was above a general store, reached by an outside staircase Sarah had to crawl up on hands and knees. Selah stayed close behind her, ready to catch her if she fell. Dolly waited below with the children, her face tight with fear. Judge Farrow was a gray-haired man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from his desk as Sarah stumbled through the door, took in her condition, and immediately stood. Good Lord, woman, sit down before you collapse. Sarah made it to the chair before her legs quit entirely. She laid Matthew's papers on the desk with shaking hands. My name is Sarah Kennett. My husband died 3 weeks ago on the trail to California. His partners abandoned me in the desert. These people saved my life and my daughter's life. I need to claim my husband's land, and I need them protected under my employment. Farrow picked up the documents, his eyes scanning quickly. These appear legitimate. The land grant is valid, signed by the territorial governor himself. He looked at Selah. You're Navajo. I am. There's a bounty on a Navajo man accused of murder in Santa Fe. That you? Selah met his gaze steadily. I am accused. I did not do it. The man who died was killed by his own business partner over a card game. I was convenient to blame. Farrow studied him for a long moment, then turned back to Sarah. And you're willing to stake your claim on employing a wanted man? He saved my life when white men left me chained to die. Yes, I'll stake everything on him. The judge was opening his mouth to respond when boots thundered on the stairs outside. Lieutenant Vogel burst through the door, 3 soldiers behind him, dust still coating their uniforms from hard riding. Judge Farrow, I'm here to arrest that Navajo man for murder and this woman for harboring fugitives. Vogel's eyes locked on Sarah with cold triumph. You should have stayed in that canyon, Mrs. Kennett. Now you'll hang alongside your Indian friends. Sarah tried to stand, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Promise began to cry, a thin wail that filled the small office. Farrow stood slowly, his face unreadable. Lieutenant, this is a courtroom. You'll make your accusations properly, or you'll leave. My accusations? Vogel stepped forward. I have 3 soldiers who'll testify she was hiding fugitives. I have documented reports that her husband aided a wanted criminal. That's enough for a hanging. Sarah looked at Selah, at Promise crying in her arms, at the documents on Farrow's desk. Everything Matthew had worked for, everything they'd survived, about to end in a noose. Sarah forced herself to stand, ignoring the way her vision blurred and her legs trembled. Promise's cries cut through the tension in the room. "You want testimony, Lieutenant?" Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Then hear mine. Matthew Kennett didn't aid a criminal. He aided an innocent man, being hunted for a crime he didn't commit. And when my husband died, when his own partners chained me to a wagon wheel and left me to die in the desert, it was Selah who found me. It was his sister who delivered my baby when she came 2 months early. It was Dolly who nursed my daughter with her own milk when mine hadn't come in." She stepped forward, holding Promise out so everyone could see how tiny she was. "This baby should be dead. I should be dead. But we're alive because people you call savages showed more humanity than any white man on that trail." Vogel's face flushed red. "That doesn't change the law. He's wanted for murder." "Based on what evidence?" Judge Farrow's voice cut sharp. "The word of men who had motive to lie? I've seen the Santa Fe report, Lieutenant. It's circumstantial at best." "He was there. He fled. That's guilt." "That's survival," Sarah said. "You would have hanged him without trial. Matthew gave him a chance to prove his innocence. That's not harboring a fugitive. That's basic human decency." Farrow picked up Matthew's documents again, studying them carefully. The room held its breath. Finally, he looked up. "These land papers are legitimate and properly filed. Sarah Kennett is the legal owner of a 200-acre claim near Flagstaff. As the landowner, she has the right to employ whoever she chooses to work the claim." He looked directly at Vogel. "The 1873 territorial ruling states that Navajo people cannot be forcibly relocated if they have documented legal employment with settlers. If Mrs. Kennett employs Selah and his sister, they are under her legal protection." "You can't be serious," Vogel snarled. "I'm completely serious. Unless you have actual evidence of murder, not just accusations, then you have no grounds for arrest." Farrow's eyes went hard. "And if I find out Mrs. Kennett was indeed chained and abandoned by her husband's partners, I'll have them charged with attempted murder. Now get out of my office." Vogel stood frozen, rage radiating from every line of his body. Finally, he turned and stormed out, his soldiers following. The silence that followed felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. Sarah sank back into the chair, Promise quiet now, against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Farrow nodded. "Get to that claim fast, Mrs. Kennett. File it officially. And keep those employment papers visible. Vogel won't forget this." 3 months later, Sarah stood outside the cabin they'd built together on Matthew's claim. The valley stretched green and fertile before her, watered by a stream that never ran dry. Selah was teaching Dolly's daughter how to ride one of the horses they'd purchased. Dolly sat nearby, nursing both babies at once, River and Promise side by side, as they'd been since birth. The children were growing strong now, their bond already visible in how River's hand would reach for Promise whenever he woke, how Promise would cry if her milk brother wasn't near. Selah walked over, wiping sweat from his face. "The fence is finished. The northern pasture is ready for cattle." Sarah looked at him, this man who'd kept a promise to a dying husband. "Matthew knew. Somehow he knew I'd need family." Selah smiled, rare and genuine. "Your husband gave me back my life. This is not debt, Sarah. This is family." Below them, Dolly sang softly to the babies, an old Navajo lullaby that Promise seemed to recognize as much as River did. Two families, divided by everything the world said should keep them apart, bound instead by promise and milk and survival. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another story that will touch your heart in ways you never expected.